On the West Coast in the 1990s, soda was never just soda. It was a companion to mall wandering and parking lot loitering, skate sessions that ended with scraped elbows, LAN parties where the glow of chunky monitors made midnight feel like a lifestyle, and road trips up Highway 1 with fog on the cliffs and a crinkling bag of chips riding shotgun. It was there for sunburned afternoons, outside corner liquor stores and small markets that kept the coldest cans in the back, sold to kids who look confident enough to ask and old enough to not look back. Soda was something held in a damp hand while leaning against a payphone, something hissed open before a movie started, something passed around at the beach with sandy fingers on the label. The fizzy burn in the throat was part refreshment, part ritual, a quick little spark that marked a moment as fun, or at least as breakable from routine. While Coca-Cola and Pepsi towered over everything like red and blue billboards turned liquid, the decade belonged just as much to the weird, the colorful, and the briefly beloved. The West Coast, with its blend of tech optimism, laid-back rebellion, and relentless branding, proved to be fertile ground for fizzy experimentation. The region was primed for products that felt like the future, even if they lasted only a summer. In a place where trends could begin in a surf shop, spread through a skate video, and land in a supermarket aisle. By the weekend, soda companies seemed to treat the coast like a friendly laboratory. A new label, a new color, a new promise, and suddenly the cooler at the corner store looked like a display case of possibilities. Coke and Pepsi were everywhere, of course, flowing through movie theaters where the cups were comically large, school vending machines that clanked and complained, and fast food fountains that poured with enough ice to numb any subtlety. Classic Coke remained the dependable standard, familiar as a radio hit, while Diet Coke carried a whiff of sophistication and adulthood, especially in offices, minivans, and the hands of people who insisted they could taste the difference in the can versus the bottle. Pepsi leaned harder into youth culture, music, and celebrity, and its sweeter profile fit well with a decade that rarely asked whether something was too much. If the 1990s had a default setting, it was extra, and Pepsi's glossy confidence matched it. Even the background choices had personality. Sprite and 7-Up sat in the citrus lane like the reliable friends who didn't try too hard, crisp and bright, a reset button after too many colas. Dr. Pepper, stubbornly undefinable and quietly confident, held its ground with its oddball 23-flavor mystique, favored by people who liked to feel slightly out of step with everyone else. Orange sodas like Sunkist and Fanta tasted like sunshine, turned into carbonation, a sugary burst that felt especially at home on the coast, where citrus didn't seem like a flavor so much as a regional mood. These weren't just beverages. They were defaults people picked to match the weather, the meal, or the kind of day they hoped to have. Mountain Dew surged in popularity alongside gaming culture, action sports, and late-night pizza, becoming the unofficial fuel of teenagers who believed sleep was optional and tomorrow was a problem for later. It tasted like caffeine wearing a citrus costume, sharp and sweet and slightly fluorescent, the kind of drink that matched the glow of arcade cabinets and the neon signage of mini-marts open past midnight. It fit naturally into the West Coast mix of adrenaline and entertainment, where a day could include a skate park, a drive-thru, and a living room tournament on a console that took cartridges. Mountain Dew didn't just sit on shelves. It attached itself to the idea of motion, energy, and doing one more thing before calling it a night. But the real story of 1990s soda on the West Coast lived in the experiments. The decade was flush with novelty, driven by the belief that attention was currency and that a bold idea could become a hit overnight. Soda companies seemed to chase the same dream Hollywood chased: a big splash, an instant fan base, and a product that people talked about even when they weren't consuming it. New drinks arrived with commercials that felt like mini-movies and slogans that tried to sound like a friend daring someone to try something new. Convenience stores became rotating museums of short-lived inventions, and there was a particular thrill in spotting something unfamiliar behind the glass, as if it had just landed from a different timeline. Crystal Pepsi embodied that belief perfectly. I've talked before about Crystal Pepsi in another video, so I'll only give you the skimming, but this one was clear, mysterious, and marketed with a straight face, suggesting that clarity equaled purity and purity equaled health, even if it still tasted like a cola that had misplaced its caramel notes. In a decade fascinated by see-through gadgets and glossy minimalism, the idea of a transparent cola felt futuristic and oddly clean, like a soda that had been filtered through the future. On West Coast grocery shelves, it looked both sleek and faintly unsettling, a drink that felt like it belonged in a music video or on the table at a party where people pretended to be more sophisticated than they were. It was the kind of product that made people pick up the bottle just to stare at it, tilting it in the light, checking that yes, it really was clear. The first sip often created a moment of recalibration. The brain expected one thing from a cola and received something else, a lighter, crisper sensation that didn't quite land where regular Pepsi landed. It was less sweet than many expected, with a mouthfeel that felt sharper and more brittle, like the flavor had edges. Some people found it refreshing, others found it confusing, and plenty of people decided the novelty was the main ingredient. Crystal Pepsi was as much a conversation starter as it was a beverage. Something bought to try, to show, to compare, to laugh about, to argue over. It became the kind of soda that people associated with specific places and moments. The beach trip where someone brought a six-pack just because it looked cool. The sleepover where the bottle got passed around like a science experiment. The grocery run where a kid begged for it because the label promised the future. And then it was gone, quickly enough that its disappearance became part of its identity. When Crystal Pepsi vanished from coolers and shelves, it left behind the distinct feeling that something very 1990s had come and gone. A brief craze built on style, curiosity, and the promise that new always meant better. The memory lingered the way certain commercials lingered, or the way a discontinued candy did, living on in the stories people told later about how it tasted, how it looked, and how, for a little while, it seemed like soda could reinvent itself simply by turning invisible. If Crystal Pepsi represented the decade's clean, minimalist fantasy, Surge was its neonid, the part of the 1990s that didn't want to be purified or improved, just amplified. Bright green in a way that seemed almost radioactive under fluorescent convenience store lights, aggressively sweet, and unapologetically caffeinated, Surge fit perfectly into a West Coast atmosphere steeped in skate culture, arcade noise, backyard trampolines, and the growing sense that youth marketing could be a full sensory experience. It didn't whisper refreshing. It shouted, wake up. Its flavor landed like citrus turned up to maximum volume, a rush that hit the tongue first and then seemed to echo in the back of the throat, and it felt designed to be consumed quickly, preferably while doing something mildly reckless, like flying down a hill you weren't totally sure you could stop on. The can and bottle were part of the appeal, too, with branding that looked like it belonged on the side of a jet ski or a snowboard, something meant to be seen in motion. Surge showed up at birthday parties and after-school hangouts as a kind of social dare, the drink someone handed over with a grin that implied, let's see what happens. Adults were suspicious of it, which only made it more attractive. When schools occasionally tried to ban it from vending machines, the attempted crackdown merely elevated it, giving it the aura of contraband. Surge became less a beverage than a ritual, a liquid emblem of teenage bravado. And when it vanished from everyday shelves, it did so with a fan base that refused to let it be forgotten. The kind that kept telling stories about it as if it had been a band that broke up too soon. Pepsi's answer to the growing thirst for energy was Josta, a dark, herbal, guarana-infused oddity that felt almost medicinal in its thickness and intensity, like soda that had been dared to grow up and put on a leather jacket. On the West Coast, where alternative health stores existed comfortably alongside gas stations, and where natural could mean anything from wheatgrass shots to incense, Josta straddled an unusual line. It promised energy and exoticism, and it did so with packaging that looked like it belonged on a jungle-themed album cover, complete with a sleek, predatory confidence that separated it from the more familiar reds and blues of cola royalty. The first sip could feel like a puzzle. It was sweet, yes, but also dense, with a layered, almost spicy herbal note that suggested something deeper than ordinary caramel fizz. Some people tasted sophistication or mystery in it, as if it were borrowing flavors from far away and daring the drinker to keep up. Others tasted something too strange to trust, like cough syrup's charming cousin, and set it down after a few swallows. That divisiveness became part of its personality. For those who loved it, Josta felt ahead of its time, a proto-energy drink before energy drinks knew what they were supposed to taste like, before the category had settled into the now familiar rhythm of sweet plus sharp plus inevitable jitters. For everyone else, it was simply weird, the kind of product that made perfect sense in a boardroom and total chaos on the tongue. And yet, even for the skeptics, Josta was hard to forget. It left a flavor memory that lingered like a song you didn't like but couldn't stop humming. Strangeness reached its peak with Orbitz, a drink that asked people not just to sip their soda, but to chew it, as if the beverage aisle had decided to flirt with science class and performance art at the same time. Clear bottles filled with floating gelatin balls made Orbitz look like a lava lamp you could drink, a novelty item posing as a refreshment. It often sat untouched on shelves for long stretches, not because people didn't notice it, but because they noticed it too much. Orbitz demanded attention, and it also demanded a decision. Curiosity or comfort. The liquid itself tended toward mild, vaguely fruity flavors, the kind that might have seemed unremarkable in a normal bottle. But here, it functioned as a backdrop, a stage set for the real event. The real event was the sensation of the little spheres rolling around in the mouth, playful and slightly uncanny, a texture that contradicted everything soda had trained people to expect. On the West Coast, where novelty often doubled as art, and where people could treat a product like a conversation piece, Orbitz felt like a prank and a product at the same time. It was the drink bought on a whim during a late-night snack run, the one brought home and presented to friends as if it were a discovery. Someone would shake the bottle and hold it up to the light, mesmerized, then twist off the cap with the cautious excitement usually reserved for fireworks. Reactions were half the fun. Delight, disgust, laughter, confusion, then someone insisting, try it again. People bought it once, talked about it endlessly, and rarely returned for a second bottle, which was somehow exactly what Orbitz seemed built for. A single weird memory, sealed in plastic, designed to be retold rather than repeated. Not all experiments were loud. OK Soda arrived quietly, armed with irony and a sense of existential humor that resonated deeply with West Coast Gen X sensibilities, especially in places where being unimpressed had become a form of cultural fluency. Its packaging featured bleak, slacker-style art that looked more like alternative comics than mainstream advertising, and its marketing asked questions instead of making promises, as if it were less interested in selling a drink than in winking at the whole concept of selling anything. It didn't beg to be loved. It practically dared people to feel indifferent, which in the early 1990s was a strangely compelling strategy. The soda itself tasted fine, hovering somewhere between citrus, fruit punch, and cola, a flavor profile that was deliberately hard to pin down, like a mixtape made to avoid obvious genre labels. It wasn't revolting and it wasn't transcendent. It was, in a word, okay. And that was the point. Taste was almost beside the point. OK Soda's real ingredient was attitude. It felt like a commentary on soda rather than soda itself. A beverage that shrugged instead of shouted, that implied it was too self-aware to dance in the spotlight. In certain West Coast test markets, it became the kind of thing people collected and displayed, not because they were thirsty, but because owning it suggested a particular kind of cultural literacy. The ability to recognize a joke even when it came in a can. It was too clever, too niche, and too unorthodox to survive mass marketing, but it left an outsized footprint for something that barely existed, lingering in memory as a fizzy little time capsule from an era when even a soft drink could try to be art, satire, and a mood all at once. Fruit flavors were another major current of the decade, especially in a region where sunshine and citrus felt like part of the brand and where a cold drink could seem like an essential accessory to summer rather than a simple refreshment. On the West Coast, fruity soda fit naturally into everyday life. It matched the palette of bright surf shops, the smell of sunscreen and hot asphalt, and the endless parade of after-school hangouts that revolved around convenience stores and whatever someone's older sibling could drive everyone to. Slice, Sunkissed, Fanta, and the expanding Minute Maid soda line delivered aggressive orange, grape, strawberry, and fruit punch flavors that tasted like carbonated candy, the kind of sweetness that arrived fast and loud, with a syrupy pop that clung to the tongue. Orange was the undisputed crowd pleaser, tasting like someone had squeezed a cartoon fruit into a can, while grape carried a purple punch that never pretended to resemble an actual grape, and didn't care. Strawberry and fruit punch felt like liquid versions of brightly colored snacks, and that was precisely the point. For a lot of kids and teenagers, these weren't alternatives to cola, so much as a separate category entirely, chosen for maximum flavor and maximum fun. Fruitopia leaned into a different mood, draping itself in a more natural, earthy aesthetic that suggested health, calm, and maybe even a little West Coast enlightenment, while still delivering plenty of sweetness in practice. It was the kind of drink that could sit comfortably in the same lunch as granola bars and fruit snacks, a bridge between the decade's health aspirations and its unwavering commitment to sugar. Even the names and label art felt like they belonged near a CD rack stocked with alternative rock and whatever vaguely world music the coffee shop played. These drinks thrived in convenience stores near beaches and skate parks, where cold, fruity soda felt like a reward for enduring the heat, rinsing off salt water, or just surviving a long afternoon outside with nothing but spare change and a plan to stay out until the streetlights came on. The ritual mattered as much as the taste. The hiss when the cap cracked open, the first swallow that went down almost too cold, the sticky condensation on the bottle, and the sense that bright fruit flavor matched the loud, saturated colors of the decade. Local and regional brands added texture to the scene, giving the West Coast soda world its side quests and secret levels. Josta, with its wide array of flavors and budget-friendly appeal, felt especially at home along the coast and inland alike. Stocked in supermarkets, corner stores, and the kinds of family gatherings where someone showed up with a mixed case because it was cheaper and more fun than arguing about one right soda. Its brief, colorful Super Mario Bros. Tie-in sodas made grocery aisles feel like video game levels, with character-branded flavors that turned a small can into a collectible and a taste test into a playground debate. Even when the flavors were simple, cherry, berry, apple, the packaging could make them feel like treasures, the kind of thing kids carried around proudly like it was merch rather than a drink. Jones Soda emerged toward the end of the decade with photo labels and unconventional flavors, embodying the region's independent streak and hinting at what soda would become in the artisanal era. It felt like the beverage equivalent of an indie band finding its audience. Personal, quirky, a little self-aware, and deeply tied to the idea that identity could be printed right on the bottle. In a world of massive corporate branding, Jones suggested a different kind of cool, one built on oddball charm and the pleasure of choosing something that didn't look like everything else in the cooler. It wasn't just about what it tasted like. It was about what it said about the person holding it, even if that message was simply, "This person likes their sugar with a side of personality." Looking back, the 1990s West Coast soda landscape feels exuberant and unafraid, like a marketplace that believed curiosity could be manufactured and then sold by the case. Brands tried things not because they were safe, but because they were possible, and because the decade rewarded boldness even when it didn't last. Some experiments failed spectacularly, disappearing so quickly that they became rumors and punchlines, while others lingered just long enough to become legends that people swore tasted better back then. A few reshaped the industry without realizing it, planting early seeds for energy drinks, alternative sweeteners, and the later obsession with customization and niche flavors. What remains is the memory of cold cans pulled from ice-filled coolers, of vending machine spirals turning with a clunk, of plastic rings biting into fingers as someone carried a six-pack to the beach. It's the memory of colors that seemed impossibly bright under fluorescent convenience store lighting and the way a drink could feel like a small event. A first sip in the car after a long day, a shared bottle passed around at a skate spot, a flavor someone dared a friend to try because it looked too strange to be real. It's the memory of sweetness and fizz as a kind of optimism, of a decade convinced the future would always be carbonated, loud, and just a little bit weird, and that there would always be another new flavor waiting behind the cooler door.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199X, we're here just for you, for you.